Hey, fourth grade. So today we're going to begin talking about Baroque music. So classical music is this big idea picture, even though there's actually a time period called classical music, of this classical music, this older style of music, music that comes from Europe that influences what we have today. We're going to be talking about specifically the Baroque time period. So we started with medieval 2 weeks ago, or a couple weeks ago, which all the music was sung together, and we hear a lot of it in the church. And we still hear some of that today when we go to Mass. Then last week we talked about the Renaissance. This is music that we start to hear instruments. This is where we hear the instrument first time, like the recorder. This is where all these different parts are coming together. We hear a lot of music that are dances, and this is music from kings and queens. Uh, it still sounds a little bit different. But as we get to Baroque music starts to sound a little familiar. It starts to sound like what we think of when we think classical music. So, Baroque was also reflected in art and architecture and other cultural things happening around Europe. So, when we think Baroque, we think a lot of drama, we think a lot of contention, we think a lot of over the top, ornate, very detailed things. So, we think very fancy sounding, which you're going to hear is very different when we talk about classical music next. So, Baroque, the big composer that we think about with Baroque music is J.S. Bach. We've all heard his music, whether you know it or not, we hear it everywhere, all over the place. But we're going to start talking about something different first. So, the big new thing in the Baroque time period is opera. Now, opera we hear today is all right, a lot of people just singing really, really loudly. But when we start with opera, what it is a lot of people telling stories. So it's music telling the story. So opera tells the story of Orpheus and his wife Eurydice. So here's how the story goes, and then we're going to hear it in music after this. So Orpheus is the greatest musician in the world, and whatever he plays on his lyre and sings, no human, beast, animal, or any of the Greek gods could resist. They would stop and listen. So he's the greatest musician of all time. And his wife to be, Eurydice, is one day walking out in the forest. And all of a sudden, a snake comes up and bites her leg, and she dies. And in Greek tradition, when you die, you go to the underworld, where Hades and Persephone are. So, Orpheus is distraught. He is sad. His wife has died. So he comes up with the plan that I'm a great singer. No human, beast, or Greek god can resist what I sing. I'm going to go to the underworld and plead with Hades for Eurydice to come back to the real world. Again, Greek stories are crazy. So, Orpheus goes to the underworld, and while he's there, he sings, he plays his lyre, and nobody can resist what he's doing. So, all the things that are supposed to keep him from getting to the underworld, a place where he can't go, he uses his music to get there. His music is that great. My cat's visiting. So his music is that great. And so what happens is he pleads with Hades, and Hades agrees that Eurydice can come back to the living world as long as Orpheus walks all the way back and never looks back over his shoulder to see if Eurydice is there. Seems pretty simple, right? All you have to do is walk away, and by the time you leave the underworld, Eurydice will be there with you. Well, Orpheus starts thinking in his head, and he doesn't believe. He thinks that Hades is trying to deceive him and trick him. So right before Orpheus is out of the underworld, he thinks he doesn't hear Eurydice. So he turns around, and he sees that she was right behind him the whole time. And since he looked, she's left in the underworld for the rest of history. So Orpheus comes back, and he lives the rest of his life in sadness and despair. Yeah, it's a crazy story. I never said operas end happy. So, a lot of early operas, they come from this story. And the reason this story is so important is because the people that invented opera, a group of people actually got together and they thought these Greek stories would have been sung. They would have been done like this. We know today it wasn't. It's not true. But opera was meant to reflect those early Greek stories. The story of Orpheus has a lot of drama in it. It has a lot of contention. the music reflects that. So I'm going to give you a couple of examples of early Baroque music to listen to. I'm going to show you a couple paintings too, because this is stuff you're familiar with, whether you know it or not. So again, Baroque music, we think drama. And this is from about the year 1600 to 1750. All right, I hope you enjoy our first week on Baroque music.